This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So, the series Tantra for Today. So the series Tantra for Today, in Praying Dai's talk, he laid the ground for the Vajrayana, because he kind of puts into a nutshell what the Vajrayana is and what Tantra is. And Tantra is an aspect of Vajrayana Buddhism, and it's to do with have a direct experience of what we are in our depths. That's what it's about. It's about directly experiencing that, directly experiencing reality, pratitya samuppada, in other words. What the Tantra is especially to do with is using our strongest emotions, often what some people might call negative emotions, using those as part of the practice. And tonight, we're going to look at fear. So we can think that our Dharma practice is all about making our lives nicer. And it is. There's no doubt about it. It does make it makes our life more meaningful and we get on with people better. Things are a bit brighter practicing the Dharma, though we don't really need to go to our dark places. But the Tantra is about going to those dark places and transforming them to freedom so that we can directly experience what's actually going on underneath all that fear. So we can be tempted to stay in the light and practice the precepts and being nice and keep doing the things we know. And keep doing the things we know keep the fear away. But that's really unhelpful. And avoiding the fear, it won't work. It just doesn't work. It will pop up. It will come through. But what if we could say, even this fear, even this, which might be unthinkable that you could transform whatever fear that might be, even this. What if we could face that fear and transform it? What we fear, we keep at arm's length. And what we fear, we hate. It's often what we fear makes us angry often. It's too scary, it's undermining, and we hold back. But whilst we're in fear, we can't be open-hearted, not truly open-hearted. And we can think about fear in terms of anxiety, just on Paranita said that tonight in the meeting, that actually we might not say that we have any kind of big fears that we have lurking, but we have a level of anxiety. And that too, even that. Fear of disapproval, fear of disappointing people, hi Jen. Fear of rejection, fear of blame, fear of friendship, fear of connection, fear of conflict, fear of death, fear of sickness. All of these fears can be brought into practice. Yeah, so the Buddha taught specifically about fear. He taught there was a group of monks who were meditating in the forest, and they were frightened because the spirits in the trees in the forest weren't supporting their practice. They hadn't asked permission to be in the forest, and the spirits in the forest were coming out and frightening them. So the Buddha taught them the Metta-bhavana, to include the trees and the spirits of the trees in their Metta-bhavana, and they stopped being frightened because they got to know them. And so when you get to know something, you're not so frightened of it anymore. And so this is what we need to do. We need to get to know our fears in the same way as the monks did with the spirits in the trees. He also taught about his own fear when he was terrified before he became enlightened. He used to go to the forests. He used to go to the scariest places deliberately to practice. And he'd just kind of walk up and down, and his hair be standing there because there'd be animals in the forests and there'd be ghosts and monsters lurking in the dark. And he'd just make himself, if he was walking, he'd carry on walking. If he was sitting, he'd carry on sitting. So that approach is the kind of feel the fear and do it anyway kind of approach. So the Buddha was very, he knew about fear and he taught fear. In the Vajrayana, they took it further. They took it further and saw that we, or us unenlightened beings, we need proper help. We need proper help from enlightened beings to be able to step into our fear. We need some fearsome, enlightened superheroes if we're going to be able to bear our own fear. And these fears, fear of disapproval, disappointment, rejection, fear of blame, they can feel like demons holding us back from becoming the person that we want to be, becoming kinder, wiser, more rounded human beings. It can hold us back, ultimately, from the freedom of enlightenment. And one of the things we've got to do is give everything to it. We can't just give the good stuff. We can't. But if we want to be completely whole, we need to give the deeper stuff. We need to go there. And there's a lovely story that I love about Padmasambhava. I'm going to tell you a bit more about Padmasambhava. What he was called, he was asked if he would go to Tibet. He was practicing in India. And he was asked if he would go to Tibet, and the king of Tibet sent 5 emissaries to find him. And Padmasambhava knew they would come, so he went out to meet them. And the emissaries, they said, please, will you come? And will you come to Tibet? Because we're trying to build a monastery. And Shantarakshita, the monk that we have that is teaching, has suggested you, because you are the one that needs to come, we can't get the building made. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. They threw themselves at Padmasambhava's feet and begged him to come, and he said, what have you got? What have you got to give me? And they'd brought a great big sack of gold. So they gave him the sack of gold, and he said, it's not enough. What else have you got? So she said, well, we haven't got anything else. Okay, so they took off all their clothes and all their jewels and their finery, because they were emissaries, they were servants, but they were top-notch servants. They took off all their clothes and their jewels and they gave them to Padmasambhava. He said, it's not enough. And they said, well, we haven't got anything else. All we've got is our body, our speech, and our mind. And he said, that'll do. He went and moved a mountain with his left hand. And he went and he turned a mountain into a pile of jewels. And he said, I don't need your gold. And in other areas in the story, he says, I want the heart of your life. And he agreed to go. So blissful presence. His presence is described as a blissful presence. So if you look at him there, some people think he's a bit scary. Some people think he's got this face, this scary face. But he's enlightened. He's an enlightened being. So there's no way it can be angry or of any hate or fear. His face is a face of an enlightened being. So what on earth is it? We'll talk about that in a minute. So his kindness, his compassion. Padmasambhava embodies this principle of engaging with everything, with your body, your speech, and your mind, your deepest fears. And he is the one you want to be at your back when you're doing it. And he said, I will sleep at your threshold. You call for me. All you have to do is call for me once, and I will sleep at your threshold. So is he a myth? Well, he actually did live. We think he was a real human being. He's an archetype, isn't he? He was historical. He's a bit of both. He was born from a lotus, from an emanation of a light ray that came from Amitabha's being, the Buddha of love, Amitabha. So his being is a being of love and compassion. As a child, he was adopted by a king. But a bit like the Buddha, he was dissatisfied with the life of palace, and he gave it all up to practice meditation and live the life of a Buddha or yogi. But not like the Buddha, in that he already had the Dharma. He already had the Buddha's Dharma. That was already in the world for him. He lived in the 8th century. So he studied widely. He was a master in all forms of meditation. But his practice, at the heart of his practice, at the heart of his meditation, was to sit in cremation grounds. That was what he did. It was a popular practice. He wasn't the only one that did it, but he went further than anyone else in that practice. And you can read the story of what he did in a mad and wacky, wild and incomprehensible tale of magic in The Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava. But I can't say that I recommend it because I don't understand a word of it. But it's interesting. Full of strange practices. And he overcame his fear in the cremation grounds. So it was a place where in ancient times, bodies would be taken to be burned. Well, sometimes they didn't even do that. They just left the bodies to be eaten by jackals. And so the cremation grounds were in an area like a park, I suppose, and had been for hundreds of years. So you can imagine the build-up of the bodies and the build-up of the skeletons, the build-up of the ghosts and the demons and the terrifying atmosphere that would be there on the edge of town, no light, completely black, completely dark, very lonely, full of wild dogs eating the bodies. So if you went to a cremation ground, you would see bits of bodies lying around. And to meditate, you would sit on the bones. These amazing practitioners sat on the bones of the bodies, and mummified bodies, they would sit on them. And the bodies would be in various stages of decomposition. So they weren't just skeletons. They were bloated corpses, the stench of a cremation ground you can imagine. And well, this is where Padmasambhava went to meditate. And it was a place of fear and a place to face your fear. And facing your own death, of course, because you're surrounded by, you're going to be that one day. Who knows when? But we are going to be just like those bits of bones and skulls and femurs and toes and fingers and bits of old clothes left all around the cremation grounds. So we could look at his the symbols of his being. The skull cup. The skull cup he holds in his hand, half a skull he holds in his hand. And it's, you can see on this version, you can see the red liquid kind of floating up. I really recommend that at some point tonight you can have a look at these pictures. This one is very useful because down in the little corner there's a little demon. And the kindly expression in Padmasambhava's face as he tames the demon and teaches him the Dharma. We'll talk about that in a minute. But in this, it's symbolic of shunyata, of emptiness, of everlasting life is kind of what the still cup represents. We've got the Vajra. We'll talk a bit more about the Vajra later. We've got his amazing expression. And I said before that it's a bit like if a little one in your family, if your cat or your grandchild or your daughter or had a splinter, and you had to hold the child or cat or whatever still while you got a splinter out. Yeah, it's cold and like so they wouldn't move. I can bet if someone took a picture of your face, it might look a bit like that. That kind of fierce love. I've got to do this. I've got to do this thing. You've got to sit still. You've got to let me do it. You've got to let me help you. You've got to let me be on your side. And also a challenge to us. What are we doing? What are we doing with our lives? So he was a beautiful man, beautiful man with dark hair, beautiful face, little moustache, lovely eyes, and very attractive. And that also is that kind of, you're going to talk about the Vaisya fascination, aren't you? With the being attracted, these beings can be very attractive. And then later we look at Vajra, who's not at all. So, and he has the outstretched leg. So he is ready to leap into the world. He's ready to leap into the world. When you need him, all you have to do is call his name. So Padmasambhava, I'm never quite sure if he actually danced with the Darkinis, because I think he was sitting in meditation, but the Darkinis danced for him. So what are the Darkinis? If you can see, there's a picture of there's a picture under the statue of a Darkani there. In the Darkanis were beings who lived in the cremation grounds. A Darka is a male version, the Darkani is a female version. They're Buddhas, and they're sky dancers. They're naked, they're red with passion. Vajrayogini has a frightening face. She's on fire with the joy of the Dharma. She's completely free. And she represents the forces of inspiration that arise in the enlightened mind. And Padmasambhava mastered these forces. And the Darkanis danced for him and for themselves. They and just a little introduction to Darkanis and this seminal about them. So Vajrayogini, free of fear, totally free. She's the queen of the Darkanis. Vajrayogini is an experience. We aren't enlightened, so we need the symbols. She's full of symbols. We need the symbols so that we can make sense of what they embody. They embody freedom and enlightenment, but that doesn't mean very much to us. So we need the symbols that we can make sense of ourselves. She symbolizes free moving energy of the mind. And in our culture, we'd find that really confusing. It's quite confusing. We have to make sense of it ourselves. She is three things. She's a Buddha. She's an embodiment of our own upsurging, passionate energy, including negative energy that we can transform into useful energy. She's a spiritual companion, protector. So the Tantra is all about this freeing up the energy, freeing up fear to transform it into a direct experience of reality. She's a skywalker. She's open with no boundaries, and she's a metaphor for emptiness. She's free and fully enlightened, and she looks fierce and strange. And we need to decide what she is to us. We just need to gaze into her figure and decide for ourselves what she is. She's surrounded by flames. We can become one with the symbol. She's a blazing fire of wisdom, of passion and compassion, and she burns off the hindrances. She burns off the obscuration of fear that hide our purity. She's naked and transparent with loose, wild hair, the freedom of full awakening. And she's got 3 eyes. She's got a third eye. And it's a spiritual eye that sees the past, the present, and the future. And she's got 51 or 50, it says in other places, skulls round her neck. And she has a chopper, which is a flailed knife. A flaying knife is a knife that cuts away your skin. And you can see why somebody like Vajrayogini would want you to remove your skin. Your skin is the protection. And in coming into connection with Vajrayogini, we remove those protections and come on with that fire. Strong stuff, isn't it? Really strong stuff. So we have to translate this to our own experience. None of us is going to go meditating in cremation grounds, I don't think. It wouldn't be wise. We're not from that culture. We're not from a culture of naked sky dancers. We're not from that. We have to find a way to translate it into what makes sense for us. So, just looking at the time. Be straight into that. So what she represents to us, what Sangharakshita did was he translated cremation lands into what he called crucial situations. He called them crucial situations, places where we can be surrounded by darkies, places where we can be frightened, where we are ourselves pushing ourselves into conditions that are challenging. We can find ourselves living in a comfort zone. We can find ourselves living within our limits. There's a story about a baby elephant. I think in India they would train elephants by tying them to quite a tight post. Is that right, or is it the other way around?
Yes.
And then, so the baby elephant only thought, is that right? Only thought that it had a tiny area to walk. And so because of that, they didn't ever try and escape. And so if we can kind of put that limit on ourselves, we can kind of do that to ourselves, can't we? We can tie our own rope to a stake and keep ourselves within a very nice and safe limit. Sangharakshita, the founder of the movement, was really at home with all this stuff. He loved all this stuff. Padmasambhava was a very close connection to him, and he was very at home with all of this. But he could see that for our Tantra for today, we need to translate it and make it make sense for us. So one way we can do that is to look at our comfort zone. What is our own comfort zone, and how can we step out of that comfort zone and challenge ourselves, which we need to do if we need to be to fulfill our full potential. We're held back by fear, and he taught that if we want to discover if we want to discover all of ourselves, we must put ourselves into what he called crucial situations. So, and in those situations, we have to discover new resources. We have to dig deep, and we have to discover that and get rid of the old, limited version of ourselves, because we're forced to be a bigger human being. I went on, one example of that would be a Karana appeal. You know, you might find one day that you might like to do that, go door knocking and ask people if they would like to donate to a charity. They open the door and you say, hello, I'm collecting for a charity. And that is the scariest thing that you might ever do. So one way, you know, could be that doing a Karana appeal is one way that we could put ourselves into a crucial situation. It could simply be that you have a scary conversation with someone that you've been putting off. So there's various ways that we can put ourselves into a crucial situation. The scary situations. But what Vajrayogini does is she says to us, keep going. She is a serious protector. She's a serious protector of anybody who feels that they want to step into a fearful situation. She purifies the ground, and she stamps out of fear. She stamps out hatred and attachment. If you look at her figure, she's stamping body and corpse underneath. And that's what she can do for us. She can stamp on the things that frighten us and hold us back. You know, she's a shapeshifter. She's not always in that pose. She will come and stand with us in any situation that we find fearful, and she'll stamp behind us. I would really recommend learning her mantra. Her mantra is Om Vajrayogini Hum Pat Svaha, Om Vajrayogini Hum Pat Svaha. And even the mantra is kind of got hasn't it? You can feel I would really recommend chanting that mantra if you're in a place where, in what Sangharakshita called a crucial situation. So, yes. So Padmasambhava eventually got to Tibet. He did get there. He eventually made it. And he, I'm sure lots of you know the story already. But when he reached Tibet, what he needed to do was he needed to go into these situations again and again and again and face the beings of Tibet who were opposing the Dharma taking root. We have forces, Abels, that oppose the Dharma taking root. We have them. We have fears that prevent us from allowing the Dharma to be fully practiced in our beings. We have them too. And what Padmasambhava did was he befriended them, he tamed them, he taught them the Dharma, and he got them on his side. And that's what we have to do. We have to do this so that we can allow the Dharma to take root in us. We have to get our fears on side, and we have to put our arms around them. You know, when we look at the expression on Padmasambhava's face here, he's looking into the face. Well, the little demon's got his head down. He's too frightened even to look up into Padmasambhava's face. But when you look at the face of Padmasambhava in that picture, you can see that he is, all he feels is compassion for this little demon who is fearful. This little demon is full of fear. Who knows what he's fearful of? Maybe fearful of Padmasambhava's disapproval. Maybe he's fearful of Padmasambhava's disappointment. Maybe he's fearful of admitting to Padmasambhava that he's done this terrible thing. But what he gets in response is compassion. Beautiful, powerful, compassionate response from Padmasambhava. And although Vajrayogini might not look quite like that, her whole being is compassion. It's compassion, with passion. She's red with the fire of passion, but her whole being is compassion. And she will she'll stand with us while we face our demons or face our fearful beings in us. And she'll stand with us. So Sangharakshita said that a life lived properly is a life that is lived sometimes in cremation grounds. We can't live our whole life in cremation grounds because we just go bonkers, wouldn't we? We can't live. We have to have we have to have Sangha is what we need. We need Sangha and friendship and positive emotion. We need to do the Metta Bhavana. We need to do the mindfulness of breathing. We need to come to the center, eat together, have friends. We need that level of practice so that we can step out into, when it's appropriate, a crucial situation. So it's when we have challenges that are skillful. I mean, it's not like you think to yourself, oh, I'm going to go and rob a bank. That's a really scary situation. I'll call on Vajrayogini for help. The Vajrayogini would be interested in that. Vajrayogini would be very interested if you were going to have a conversation with somebody that you thought where you're going to have to say something that someone else is going to be disappointed by. Or you are going to do something that you might want, you might decide that you're going to commit to one of the things we do here at the centre. Could be gardening team, or could be cleaning on a Tuesday morning, or not cleaning, the beautifying of the centre on a Tuesday morning. It could be something here that you want to commit to, but you're a little bit frightened of. It could be becoming a mitra. It could be asking for a donation. So in those scary situations, these new challenges, even this, whatever this might be, even this, we take these challenges onto the path and put them at the feet of Padmasambhava or at the feet of a Darkini like Vajrayogini. And we say, be with me when I'm doing this. We've also got Padmasambhava's mantra, which I think you know, that we can chant in these moments when we're just feeling a little bit wobbly. But we're not living a life just seeking safety. That's not you could say that that's not a life fully lived. We need to dance with the Darkinis. So we can commit to things is a very, very, it's definitely a crucial situation. Sangharakshita would put that number one, really. Commit to something and keep your commitment. Because when you commit to something, you don't even know what you're committing to, actually. You can't tell what the future brings. And we can be Darkinis for each other, actually. Within the Sangha, we can be Darkinis for each other. Because when you have that conversation, the Darkini is present. And the last retreat we did was about the Darkini, about communication. That exhilaration of the rush of energy when you do something you're frightened of and it goes well. When it goes badly, I'm not quite sure how that works. I suppose you just have to trust that that is the beginning of a process. But even, if just the actual efforts of trying to do something that is outside of your comfort zone, that new challenge, the darkening is present and it's exhilarating and gives loads of energy. When you come and see her, you'll see the flames are like around her. And, their hair's like, wow, it's loose, and she's just flying across the sky, trampling beings, and she's got this garland of skulls and flame like in school cup. And it's like, wow, this being. And it's a bit like that, sitting in the library having a scary conversation with a friend. It can be as big as that. And yeah, that would be a good example of committing to something, or becoming a mitra, carrying appeal, working on that thing that makes you anxious. Just working on that, whatever that might be. The thing about what she's doing is that an unenlightened being like me looking at her, but what it makes me feel like is that I could feel what I'm feeling, and it might feel like I'm on fire. And so feeling what I'm feeling, and what we're going back to is week 2 of the intro course. We're going back to the gap. It's actually all we're doing is going back to the gap. And in that gap between, this is really scary, I'm going to do what I always do, this is really scary, I'm going to do something different. That's just the gap. That's all it is. Calling on Vajrayogini, calling on Padmasambhava when we're in the gap. And kind of noticing where we go, where do we go to, what do we do to keep ourselves in a comfort zone. So when Padmasambhava went to Tibet, and he on the way to the monastery, he met all of the demons of the way. He met them all, and he overcame them. He converted them to the Dharma. He gave them a name. He gave them a secret name. And it's that thing about naming it, isn't it? He named the demons, gave them a name, and they became protectors of the Dharma. Sometimes that's all we have to do. Our own fears is name them. Oh, it's that's what I'm really frightened of. That somehow this situation is ringing bells with something else in my life. And it's, oh yeah, that's where that comes from. I think sometimes naming our fears is helpful. And so I was just on that page. It's nearly time. So this from the Sagalashtu. So darka, the word darkening comes from, and it's massive because the way it printed. It means space or sky. So Vajrayogini belongs to the sky. She flies through the sky. She travels through the sky. And what is the sky? The sky is not the literal sky, not the sky of blue that we see with our eyes. The sky here is the sky, as it were, of the one mind, the sky of the absolute. And this sky of the one mind, this sky of the absolute is not, as it were, vacant. It's not empty. It's not inert. It's full of life and full of energy. There are all sorts of currents of energy flowing through it, flowing across it all through time. Forces, if you like, arising within its immaculate depths all the time. And Padmasambhava in the burning grounds has spent much time in accompanying the Darkinis. He is acquainted with these great spiritual forces. His experience is not, as it were, intellectual. He is even, we may say, a master of these forces. So what a double act. Padmasambhava actually is linked with lots of other beings. Particularly if he has a strong connection, but he does have a strong connection with the Darkinis. And it might be that there's something coming up this week. There might be a situation that you feel that you're going to move into that is making you anxious. Or it could be that you're going to make a commitment, or you might want to come talk about being a mitra. And it might be that we just get to know these two a little bit. I'd really recommend coming up and having a look at them, and having a read of what's written on the left-hand side there in the book, that this book here has got pictures of Vajrayogini all on the edge and pictures of cremation grounds. And this picture here hasn't got a lot of the normal kind of things that you expect to see in Padmasambhava. But I would really recommend looking at his face in the way that he's looking at the demon, because that is how we would look at us if we decided to work with any of our fears, and he would help us transform them to freedom. So that's it.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.